Every week, my team helps people relocate to Houston. Some from California, others from Florida, Arizona, Maryland, and all over the country. And almost every one of them says the same thing. I can't believe how much house we can get for the money here. But if you've lived in Houston your entire life, you've probably had the opposite reaction. You look at the same house and think, there's no way that that's worth $500,000. The interesting thing is that both people are looking at the exact same house and they're both right. That's what I call the Houston migration paradox. And I've watched something similar happen right here in Houston. I've been in real estate for the past 20 years, and I've watched this metro transform as more and more people from all across the country are discovering what Houston has to offer. Areas that people barely talked about years ago are now filled with new neighborhoods, restaurants, retail, schools, and major developments. And today, I spend much of my time helping families relocate from higher cost markets make that exact move. So in this video, I want to answer 3 questions. Why are people choosing Houston? Is relocation actually driving up home prices? And what does all of this mean if you're buying or selling a home here today? The easiest way to understand why people are moving to Houston is to look at the decisions they're making before they ever get here. I recently worked with a family moving from California. Their budget was around $900,000, which sounds like a lot of money until you start looking at what they're trying to buy back home. To get the same house they needed for their growing family, they could easily be looking at well over $1.5 million in many parts of California. Here in Houston, that same $900,000 budget gives them significantly more options. They can get a larger home, more square footage, a bigger backyard, potentially a 3-car garage, and access to some of the highly sought after master plan communities throughout the Houston area. And depending on where they choose to live, they might not even end up spending the entire $900,000. They can get the space they need, access to the schools and amenities that they want, and do it without stretching their budget to the breaking point. That's the first version of this story. People aren't necessarily moving here because Houston suddenly became the trendiest city in America. They're moving here because the math in the places that they're leaving stopped working. I'm working with another buyer right now who moved here from Baltimore. He's buying a home for around $500,000 here in Katy, and it's a major step up from the property that he owned back home. His old house sat on a very busy street and the insurance premiums just kept getting worse. Meanwhile, most of his family had already relocated to Houston over the past several years. He was the last one to make the move, and he's genuinely excited about what his budget buys here. Then I have another client here from Florida. He's looking for more space and more value for his money. His budget goes all the way up to about $1.5 million, but he probably won't need to spend anywhere near that to get the kind of house that he wants here. We're probably looking at somewhere below $900,000 that gives him the space, the quality, and the lifestyle that he's looking for. 3 completely different buyers, 3 completely different parts of the country, but the basic calculation is the same. Houston still gives people options. They can buy more house, they can take advantage of having no state income tax, they can live closer to family, and in many cases, they can build a life here without every financial decision revolving around cost of housing. Now, Houston is experiencing significant growth, and we've been experiencing it for years. People continue relocating here from across the country, companies continue investing here, and development continues pushing further into the suburbs. But even with all of that growth, Houston has something working in its favor that many other major cities simply can't match. We still have room to build. You drive through places like Katy, Cypress, Richmond, Manville, Atascocita, and you'll see new communities and new construction continuing to expand across the metro. That additional housing supply is a big part of what allows Houston to continue absorbing new residents while still offering buyers more house for their money than many of the areas that they're leaving. And that's the part of the conversation that tends to get missed. But here's where that creates an interesting dynamic in the Houston housing market. The exact same house can feel like an incredible deal or completely unaffordable depending on who's looking at it. Imagine a family moving here from California, okay? They sell a modest home for about 1.4 million, move to Houston and buy a beautiful house in Cypress or Katy for $850,000. From their perspective, they just saved over $500,000 and upgraded their lifestyle in the process. Now imagine someone who grew up here in Houston. They worked hard, saved for years, and finally have enough money for a down payment. They walk into the exact same house and they think, who can afford this? Neither person is wrong. They're just comparing Houston to two completely different realities. And that's the Houston migration paradox. And that's why conversations around housing have become so emotional. The person relocating here sees opportunity. The lifelong Houstonian sees prices that have moved much faster than their paycheck. Both perspectives are valid. But here's where I think the conversation gets oversimplified. It's easy to point at the family from California or Florida and say they're the reason that housing is getting so expensive. I don't think that's the biggest story here. The biggest story is supply and demand, but Houston is a little bit different. We are building a lot of homes across the metro, but that supply isn't evenly distributed. If 10 families move to Houston and there are 50 homes available that meet what they are looking for, nobody really notices. But if those same 10 families are all trying to buy in the same highly desirable neighborhood, school district, or master plan community, now everybody notices. That's essentially what happens here. Houston's population is growing rapidly, but so is our housing supply. So even with all of the new construction happening across the metro, demand can still create competition in the areas buyers want most. Whether it's relocation buyers, local move-up buyers, or first-time buyers entering the market, they're often competing for the same types of homes in the same areas. The real challenge isn't that too many people are choosing Houston. It's making sure we're continually building enough housing to keep pace with the demand that's already here and the people who continue moving here. And that's an important distinction, because if you blame the entire market on relocation, you start looking for the wrong solution. The real solution is increasing supply while continuing to grow responsibly. So no, I don't think Houston has become unaffordable, but affordability has become much more area specific than it was even 5 years ago. And that's the part that both local and relocation buyers really need to understand. So, is Houston growing too fast? That's a question worth asking, because Houston is experiencing tremendous growth and you can see it happening all across the metro. People continue relocating here from across the country. Companies continue investing here. New communities are being built, and development continues pushing further and further outside of Houston. Look at what's happening across the metro, okay? Cypress continues growing northwest. Katy and Fulshire continue expanding west. Richmond and Rosenberg are growing southwest. Manville and Iowa Colony are expanding south. And north of Houston, we're seeing tremendous development throughout Tomball, Magnolia, Conroe, and Montgomery. Places that were largely undeveloped years ago are now filled with new neighborhoods, restaurants, retail, schools, and entire master plan communities. Houston has momentum, and I think that's pretty exciting, but here's what makes Houston different from many other major cities experiencing this kind of growth. We still have room to grow. Houston isn't boxed in by major geographic barriers. Development can continue moving outward in virtually every direction for a very long time. And that's one of the reasons we've seen so much new construction throughout the Houston metro. But having room to grow doesn't mean there aren't challenges. The infrastructure has to keep up, okay? Traffic has to be addressed. Schools, roads, utilities, and services all have to expand along with that population. And desirable areas can still become more expensive as more people compete to live there. So the question isn't whether Houston is going to continue growing, and it definitely will. The bigger question is whether Houston can continue growing while maintaining the affordability and the opportunities that attracted so many people here in the first place. And this is where Houston has one major advantage. we still have room to build. That's why we're seeing so much new construction throughout the metro. Now, there are still some challenges, okay? Inventory can vary dramatically depending on the area and the price point. Desirable neighborhoods and communities can still be very competitive. And if mortgage rates eventually come down, we could see more buyers jump back into the market, which could put additional pressure on prices. Now, more sellers will likely list too. So, how those two forces balance out isn't something anyone can predict with certainty right now. But I don't think Houston's future is predetermined. The question is whether we continue building enough housing to keep pace with the number of people who already live here and the people who continue relocating here. Because if we do that, I think Houston has a real chance to continue growing without losing one of the biggest reasons people move here in the first place, the opportunity to get more home for their money. Now, one of the advantages of doing this every day is that I get to see the market from both sides. I'll spend the morning helping a family relocate from California, and that afternoon I'm showing homes to someone who's lived in Houston their entire life. What's interesting is that both groups tend to make the opposite mistake. For relocation buyers, the biggest misconception is that everything here is cheap. Compared to, where you're coming from, it probably is. But that doesn't mean every house is a good value. The areas most people want to live are still competitive. If you're shopping in places like the Heights, Memorial, Bel Air, or some of the more desirable communities in Cypress or Katy, you're competing with local buyers who know those areas really well. Houston is affordable compared to many major cities, but it is not effortless. You still need to understand the market you're buying into. On the flip side, I think a lot of local buyers have convinced themselves that they've been completely priced out. And I don't think that's actually true. Now, I do think some have been priced out of certain areas and certain price points. And there's a difference, okay? That brings us to where the real opportunity is hiding. If your goal right now is to move in ready, start a home in one of Houston's most desirable neighborhoods for under $300,000, that search can be genuinely difficult, if not impossible. That's just the reality of this market. But that doesn't mean home ownership is out of reach. It just means that the search has to change. There are still opportunities throughout the Houston metro, especially when you're willing to look beyond the areas that everyone talks about first. They're not always the neighborhoods people picture when they first started looking, but they're places where you can buy a solid home, start building some equity, and use that as a stepping stone to the neighborhood you eventually want. That's how most people build wealth through real estate. Rarely is your first house ever your forever home. Social media has made this harder than it needs to be. Everyone sees the beautiful renovated home in the Heights, the luxury home in Bel Air, or the brand new home in Bridgeland and starts there. When in reality, a lot of those homeowners started somewhere else first. They built equity, they moved up, and then they eventually got the house that they actually wanted. So instead of asking, where can I buy my forever home? The better question is going to be, where can I buy my first opportunity? Because 5 years from now, that answer might look a whole lot smarter than waiting on the sidelines and hoping for prices to go back to where they were in 2020. So where are we going from here? Well, if I had to look ahead for the next 5 to 10 years, I think Houston is in a genuinely strong position. We're still affordable enough that people from higher coast markets see real value here. And we're still building. Drive through Cypress, Katy, Bossier, Richmond, Manville, Conroe, Tomball, Montgomery, and you'll see subdivisions and new construction growing up across the metro. That's something Houston still has room to do. But I think two things will determine what happens next. The first is housing supply. The challenge isn't getting people to move here. The challenge is going to be, building enough homes for the people who are already here while welcoming the people who want to come. If we don't, the affordability that made Houston attractive starts to slowly disappear. And that's a path that we want to absolutely avoid. Now, I think two things will determine what happens next in Houston. The first is going to be housing supply. Can we continue building enough homes to keep up with the people who already live here and those who continue moving here. Because if we don't, that affordability, like I said, will make Houston start to disappear. The second is what the city is becoming. Houston continues to grow, attract new businesses, and invest in its future. Cities should evolve, but that growth can't come at the expense of the people who already call Houston home. The real question isn't whether more and more people are moving here. It's whether Houston can continue growing while remaining a place where people can still afford to build a life. And if you're still trying to figure out which part of Houston makes the most sense for you, watch this video called "Which is Houston's Best Area, North, East, South, or West?" Now be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, we hope to show you around town.